Let me just welcome everybody because some people have not been on our weekly communication support Zoom, which is the container for our Wednesday get-togethers. And I'm really excited that for the next 3 weeks, they're going to be focusing on storytelling with Shannon Turner from StoryMuse. Just some best practices if you can, if you're able to keep yourself on mute, but remember to unmute yourself when you're talking. And that we do use the chat. I don't know how much that you will want people to be using chat, Shannon, so you should dictate that. And this is being recorded, so I just wanted to make sure people knew that. All right, so I'll hand it over to you, Shannon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you all. Just to answer that first question, I love chat. I find it, especially as someone that tends to hold back a little bit in larger group discussions, chat's a great way for me to engage, and especially to talk to people when a thought I feel like is going to pass me by. To just put that in the chat. I see your notes, Guylaine, about the fact that you'll be leaving us at a few minutes early. And so I just want to go ahead and mention that on our next event, a week from now, we're going to be doing a project called Life Maps. And so we want to make sure everyone comes next week prepared with some supplies. So we're going to have, ask everyone to have some blank paper, really as big as you can do it, or a dry erase board would work, as long as you're committed to capturing that for yourself. But, just nice big blank paper, some colored markers, pens, pencils, whatever your favorite medium will be. And we're going to be drawing maps of our lives next week. So be prepared for that. Well, I am so pleased to be with you all and to see some rooters on this call. And also we have with us the first StoryMuse intern, Clay Dean from Virginia Tech is with us. Thank you for being here, Clay. Should we do a quick round of who we are and where we come from from the world, and let's say one word check-in.
One word what?
One word check-in. Just
check-in. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And okay.
Yeah. And
so I can read off the list, okay, if that's helpful. Okay. Absolutely. So there's someone calling in from a 404 area code. You want to go first?
I think that may be me. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's you.
Okay. This is Susan. I had trouble getting onto the Zoom on the computer, so I just called in. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and my word for this morning is bold.
Great. Shannon, you're next.
Shannon calling in from Atlanta, and my word this morning is overalls.
Okay. Catherine at the Myrna Loy.
Good morning. I'm in Helena, Montana, and we had snow actually in the mountains. So I guess I'll say fresh.
All right. Kristen Muller.
Hi, I'm calling in from Connecticut, but I run Peters Valley, and I would say energy.
All right. Nancy's iPhone.
Hi, I'm calling in, or I'm on the call from the Jersey Shore, and I would say foggy.
Okay. Tracy Broyles.
Good morning. I'm calling in from the Catskills, and first word that comes to mind is buck.
Okay. Yesenia.
Hello, I'm calling in from South Jersey, and it is cloudy.
All right. Allison.
Hi, sorry, I had to mute myself. I'm actually another Jersey girl here, North Jersey. The word for me, I would say, is sunny.
Okay. Brandy.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Brandy Turner with Sip Culture, calling in from Utica, Mississippi, and I would say multitasking.
All right, Brienne.
Hi, Brian from, up in the Poconos in northeastern Pennsylvania. My word would be excited.
All right. Clay.
Hi, I'm calling in from Blacksburg, Virginia, and my word for the morning is hungry.
All right. Annie?
Hi, I'm calling in from Philadelphia, and my word for the morning is refreshed. I just came back from vacation. Yes.
All right. Guylaine?
I'm calling from Charleston, South Carolina. Part of Tiny is Powerful, and my word today is timeline.
All right. Chris Campbell.
Sorry, I'm trying to homeschool at the same time. I'm Chris Campbell. I live just north of New York City, and I'm guessing we're doing a word of the day. My word of the day is succulent.
Nice. And I see that behind you. All right. El Suarez.
Hi, I am a longtime rooter from way back. It's been a while since I've seen some of your familiar faces. Great to see you all. My word, and I'm calling from San Antonio, Texas. My word of the day is recuerdos.
All right, Susan Hagood.
That's me again. I got connected online.
Oh, okay, great. All right. Who has not introduced themselves? Anybody? Me. I'm Ennis. Oh, Kathleen. I'm in Philly, and the word of my word of the day is like revving up. I know that's more than one word, but Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen from Portland, Oregon, and my word of the day is embrace.
Nice. And I see Carlene just jumped in. Carlene,
Hello.
We're just doing our name, where we are calling in from, and one word for today. And you can go ahead, Carlene.
Hi, my name's Carlene Thomas Spangler. Calling in from, I guess, location, Philadelphia. And one word for today is structure.
All right, great. All right, is turned on. So sharing is turned on for you, Shannon.
Okay, fantastic. Well, again, I am so pleased to be with you all today, and we're going to talk about storytelling. I've been a professional storyteller and story coach for going on 4 years now. Of course, I've been a storyteller my whole life, and there are many stories that go in between for how it is that I only got around to this business a little while ago. We could talk about that another time. But today, we're going to talk about the transformative power of storytelling as an opportunity for you all in the work that you do. Of course, there are many reasons why we should work on our stories, and I'm sure if you're on this call, you already have a sense of what that is. I go all over and I help people tell their stories in lots and lots of contexts. I've worked with clergy, with faculty, with girls who've been sex trafficked, with folks who are either currently unhoused or who are building their way out of homelessness. I've done amazing shows with folks at 7 Stages here in Atlanta and with the Atlanta Center for Self-Sufficiency. There are lots of skills that come from this process. Of course, there's communication, job readiness, there's therapeutic benefits, and there's the personal skills of building one's self-confidence. I'm curious, as we get into this practice, what are your earliest memories of storytelling? When you think back, what are some of the first times that you remember hearing storytelling?
My grandfather.
And what do you remember noticing about your grandfather telling stories?
So actually, could you officially put granddaddy?
Oh, yes.
Because that is pretty important.
Got it.
We would sit up we would just lie in the bed. They lived in the South, in Tennessee and in Florida, and it was always hot in the summers when I would go visit. So we would just try to be lying in the bed with a fan on us and just tell stories to each other.
Mm-hmm. And what did you notice about how he told stories?
He actually was a really good, like, catalyst for storytelling. So he would ask questions and then he would kind of fill in with his own information. But he was more interested in getting me to tell a story.
I love that. All right, let's hear from someone else.
This is Annie. I think for me, my culture, so like I'm Nigerian and I just always grew up hearing stories, like my family, that's just like something that we do. It's always like, you know, storytelling, telling stories of, you know, our experiences or just stories of like, you know, your great grandfathers and all that stuff. And I feel like some of our histories are like passed down through those stories. Yeah.
Who else?
I have to say, this is Brandy. I would have to say my dad. And if we're going with names that we call him, it would be Daddy-O. But he was very animated. It was always a lot of excitement, and you kind of just like hung, you know, on just his every word, waiting to hear the next thing. And it usually involved like a lot of movement. Yeah, when he's telling his stories. So, and it would be stories of often his childhood experiences.
Chris has her hand up. Chris Campbell.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I remember parents telling stories to other parents, to other adults, and then also books. So listening to the stories, yeah, and books.
Books.
Okay. Well, we'll use that as a foundation as we start to think about this process of telling our own stories. It was the winter of my discontent. The first of many, as it turns out, because I did not yet know that I'm a sufferer of seasonal affective disorder. It was the night before exams, my senior year of college, and I was wandering. I was literally wandering from dorm room to dorm room, bothering the crap out of everybody. They were doing the thing that everyone else is supposed to do, which is to what? Study. Right. Or drink heavily and play Skip-Bo and watch Days of Our Lives on the VCR because it was the 90s. And I was wandering around having the same conversation with everyone. Should I drop out of school? Should I take a semester off? Or should I just keep barreling through? You see, the reason for this deep, dark, angsty business is that my uncle had died of AIDS here in Atlanta, and I was up in Southwest Virginia, and he had nearly passed from this earth without telling anyone in our family who he was. And it had led me to question who I was, who our family were, that he would feel like he needed to hide from us. Well, let's face it. Also, I was just a college student, so angst was just a part of the agenda, the menu of items that you go through when you're in college. But here I was, wandering around, having this conversation with everyone, when finally they said, we've had it. We've had it with you and your angsty business. We nominate you to go down to midnight brunch on our behalf. You see, at the sweet little liberal arts college in Southwest Virginia where I went, all of the faculty and administration would show up the night before exams, and they would do the sweetest thing. They would serve us pizza and eggs and waffles and syrup on a styrofoam plate before they would then slowly kill us over the next 2 weeks. And we would all show up in our pajamas with our Norton anthologies tucked under our arms and have a great time and pile our plates full of food and go back and then continue studying heavily, or, you know, that other thing. So I thought this was a great idea. You know, get out of my head, get out of their hair, do something useful for a while. You know, they say that's what you're supposed to do something useful to get out of the place that you're in. So I was wandering back through my dorm yard, arms piled high with pizza and eggs and waffles and syrup on, you know, styrofoam plates, when all of a sudden I had one of those moments. They happen to me frequently. Perhaps they happen to you as well. When I'm in one moment, I'm one place, and then I'm in another, on the ground. Frequently, there's a lot of pain involved. This moment was sponsored by the fact that someone had left a cap half off the pipe in the yard. And if I thought that I was existentially stuck before, now here I was quite literally stuck because I could not pull my foot out of the pipe. And it hurt so bad, y'all, because the pipe had scraped all the way up my shin from ankle to knee. There I lay, pizza, eggs, waffles, syrup stuck all over me. Help! Now, because most of us are of a certain age, I don't need to take too long to explain this, but Clay will probably need a little bit of a history lesson. A few years before this, baby Jessica had fallen down a well. Baby Jessica was an 18-month-old infant in Texas who wandered out of her home and fell straight down into the earth. I remembered baby Jessica very well because at the time, because there was not 24-hour CNN news coverage, when something major happened, they just preempted the only 4 channels that existed. And they preempted Beauty and the Beast with Ron Perlman and Linda Hamilton before she got guns for Terminator 2. So I was not happy with baby Jessica. But as I lay there, all I could think about were the helicopters and the spotlights down in my face. Hour 18. College student Shannon Turner has struggled for 18 hours as rescuers have struggled valiantly to free her. Help! Until finally, one of my friends looking for her pizza and eggs and waffles and syrup on a styrofoam plate finally came out onto the balcony and heard me yelling into the darkness. Because again, this was the 90s, so there were no ubiquitous little cell phones in your pocket that you could just pull out and call someone. And so she came out into the yard and she said, "What's the matter for you?" Well, just stand up. Right. You see, laying down as I was causing my foot to point out like this. But as soon as I stood up, it caused my foot to point down like this. And so I was easily able to pull it out of the pipe. And so these days, sometimes when I feel like life has just knocked me down, sometimes I'm able to remember all I have to do is just stand up. All right, thanks y'all. Okay, so we're gonna use that story as a jumping off place. We're gonna talk about how we go about using our personal stories to just for whatever we might use to talk, to tell a story. We don't have to say it's a good story, it's just an example story. So what did you notice about my story? Don't forget to take yourselves off mute.
It's very
Physical.
personal. Oh. It is. It's like Anna said, it's physical and it's also really personal. It's like deeply personal.
What made it personal?
I found that you're speaking, this is Lisa
Mm-hmm.
Suarez, the speaking from first person, and, again, for the most part, yes.
Mm-hmm. What else did you notice?
This is Brandy. You set a scene, like you were able to really like create a picture to where you could imagine like what things were looking like, from the dorm rooms, the styrofoam plate piled with food, and yeah, in just the time period. Also, just identifying it with something that was like a relevant event during that time that connected directly to your story.
Mm-hmm.
In the chat, Emmy said it's very visual. And Chris said you were talking about different ways of being stuck and stickiness and emotionally stuck.
There's metaphor.
Cool. You guys got a lot out of that. Thank you.
Some sound.
Sound effects?
Sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Susan. Also, I noticed that you really shared everything that we needed to know that showed how you got to that moment at the end.
Like some backstory.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. This is Lisa. The references, of course, in time and, exactly when this had occurred, including the sharing the information with Clay, which was great. I was like,
that never lands as well with younger people as with baby Jessica.
Yes, I remember that.
Who, by the way, go ahead.
I remember baby Jessica too, and I remember, I was pretty young at the time, but God, that just rocked my world, and that it's like super clear in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. By the way, a great story came out about her a few years ago. She's totally alive, well, happy, healthy, has family. Like she's doing great.
Great.
So we're going to segue now I appreciate your feedback on that. Please feel free to keep dropping things that you think about into the chat. I may not see it as I go through my slides, but I'll come back to that in a little while. So these are some of my StoryMuse's how-to tips for how to tell a good story. So the first thing is just really important, which is to know your first and last line. Everyday conversation is like a tennis match. Like I talk for a little while, you talk for a little while, it goes back and forth. But when you tell a story, you take the energy and you hold on to it for a while. And so you have to step across that liminal space from the back and forth to really standing in your power. And the first line is really important for doing that. So usually I start that story with, "It was the winter of my discontent." I don't know if I did this time, but usually, yeah.
You
so
did.
That's a good first line for sort of oh, that's something different. This doesn't sound like everyday conversation, right? So I think sometimes it's helpful to have an opening line that sort of sets the scene and makes it clear that, okay, here we go. This is a story. And the last line is the same way. It sort of gives that energy back to the space. So in that way, I'm going to introduce you to what I call the story sandwich. So the first line and the last line hold that sandwich together. How many people here love sandwiches? Yeah? Okay. Well, good, because the bread is really important for holding together a sandwich. So if the bread is the first line and the last line, then the details are like the lettuce. And I noticed you guys had some things to say about the details in my story. So how many times have you got a sandwich and you had to take off the top of the bread and scoop off a bunch of the lettuce and put it back together just so you could fit it in your mouth? Yeah? Or how many times have you gotten a sandwich and you thought, what this sandwich really needed was some good crisp lettuce. So details are the lettuce because they really serve and drive the story forward. And they can make your story expand. So I could have told that story in 6 seconds, 60 seconds, or I think it took me 6 minutes to tell at that time. And that's how details expand, but they really do need to be crisp because there's nothing worse than limp lettuce, right? Yeah, same thing with details. Details that are not helpful are not going to serve your story. I will never forget, I used to have this aunt who was the worst. I hated to run into her after she'd been on vacation because she would always make sure to tell you about how the towels were folded in the hotel room where she stayed. Who cares? Not an interesting detail, you know? So you got to find the details that really move your story forward. Now, the cheese of your story is vulnerability. And vulnerability is super important. It's also really hard for a lot of people. And the reason why I say it's the cheese is because I don't really want to eat a sandwich that doesn't have cheese on it. But how many people here know about Brene Brown? She's sort of our patron saint of vulnerability. Y'all heard of her? Yeah.
Yep.
I'm going to play a quick video, just a snippet of her TED Talk that she's really super famous for, just because I want to sort of show what we're talking about here in terms of what. Oh, I thought this was going to go to the specific moment. Sorry, fortunately, I've got it all memorized. Come on. Oh, come on. Our technology has been serving us really well so far. All right, so I'm going to set this up a little bit for us.
I'm going to tell you a little bit about my TEDx Houston talk. I woke up the morning after
Brene Brown became famous for having done another TED Talk before this. And she, it blew up her life. She became super famous for it, and she didn't anticipate that. So that's what she spends the first part of this talk talking about.
But I want to talk about what I've learned. There's two things that I've learned in the last year. The first is vulnerability is not weakness.
Can y'all hear that?
And that myth is profoundly dangerous. Let me ask you honestly, and I'll give you this warning. I'm trained as a therapist, so I can outweight you uncomfortably. So if you could just raise your hand, that would be awesome. How many of you, honestly, when you're thinking about doing something vulnerable or saying something vulnerable, think, God, vulnerability is weakness? How many of you think of vulnerability and weakness synonymously? The majority of people. Now let me ask you this question. This past week at TED, how many of you, when you saw vulnerability up here, thought it was pure courage? Vulnerability is not weakness. I define vulnerability as emotional risk, exposure, uncertainty. It fuels our daily lives. And I've come to the belief, this is my 12th year doing this research, that vulnerability is our most accurate measurement of courage. To be vulnerable, to let ourselves be seen, to be honest. One of the weird things that's happened is after the TED explosion, I got a lot of offers to speak all over the country. Everyone from schools and parent meetings to Fortune 500 companies. And so many of the calls went like this. Hey, Dr. Brown, we loved your TED Talk. We'd like you to come in and speak. We'd appreciate it if you wouldn't mention vulnerability or shame. What would you like for me to talk about? There's three big answers. This is mostly, to be honest with you, from the business sector. Innovation, creativity, and change. So let me go on the record and say, Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change.
So how does that land with y'all? Because I do know that, you know, this is actually like the heart of what is hard for my work. So many people want to tell a story. They want to tell a good story. They do not know how to share of themselves generously. It is really scary. And we have lots and lots of reasons why that feels scary. We have lots of cultural stories that tell us that we cannot share who we truly are. But I'm here to tell you that you cannot tell your best stories unless you're willing to give a little bit of yourself away. The fact is, you will get more back if you're willing to take that risk. So how do we do that without feeling like we're going to go too far? I like to think of it as being like exfoliating. How many people here exfoliate? Yeah? Oh, where did my presentation go? So what do you know about exfoliating? Tell me why you do it.
To get rid of the dead skin.
Yeah. And what are the, how do you feel after you do it?
Depends how hard you do it. You can feel brand new or run over by a truck.
Oh my God, I love that, right? So you're already getting to the heart of what I mean by why exfoliating is a great metaphor for appropriate vulnerability, right? So if you exfoliate too much, then you become raw and open to infection. That's too much vulnerability in your storytelling. If you never exfoliate, then your skin becomes dry and dull and lifeless. Like nobody wants to get with that, right? So that's not having any or not enough vulnerability in your storytelling. So you have to have a little bit of skin in the game. Is the way to think about it, you know? And you've seen it, as you've probably especially seen it when it's too much, right? You've gone to a poetry slam or to church or like some place where somebody has like just, as we call it, overshared, you know? And that never feels really, really good. I mean, sometimes people need to have that moment, but in terms of us as an audience, you kind of feel like I need somebody to pay me for the therapy that I just gave them, right? If you're doing storytelling for a moment that is not therapeutic, but for everyone, then there's a way to strike that balance. So I like to think of it also as kind of being like the difference between walking up to the cliff and having that butterfly feeling, but not jumping off of it, right? Now, change. It's the meat of our story. Do you remember in English class when they used to have those diagrams that would look like this? What did this mean? Tell me, walk me through this diagram in English class. Come on, Brandy, I see you smiling. You know what this was. No?
English class is a long time ago, Shannon.
They would always start you on this point, and then they would go up like this, and then this, and then back down like this. It was called the Aristotelian Model. Now, is it starting to sound familiar? So rising action, climax, falling action, and then denouement or resolution. And they would say that was the diagram of your story, right? That you had to be able to plot out a story on this. I say that we should take it to chemistry class. Do you remember the triangle that you would see in chemistry class? When a chemical
delta means change.
Exactly, delta means change. So I'm always looking for what is the change in the story. Change in me, the circumstances, or the environment, right? And that way, it's really helpful to know what's the difference between an anecdote and a story. So I could have said, this one time in college, y'all, I put my foot down a hole. It wouldn't have been a story, right? Took me a lot longer to get to the point of like to make it a story. So what was the change in my story?
There were a couple different changes, but I think that there was like an aha moment was the most critical change that I was really aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that there was something I had learned. So in that way, I think a lot of times that resolution is what comes about. That's where we sort of learn. Some people call it the moral of my story. I sort of feel like if you have to like actually say the words, the moral of my story is, it's a little clunky, but you can find a really elegant way to figure that out, to like make that embedded in your story. And, you know, remember in mine, I just said, sometimes I remember all I have to do is just stand up. And that was the lesson or the learned or the what changed in me. So back to that last line. And I'm bringing this home again because this is not just about the importance of the last line, but about the importance of sticking your landing. Remember the gymnast, she throws her arms up in the air. And what happens if, what she get points taken off for at this point?
She stumbles, she steps back.
She wobbles, right? Or anything like that. Not the wobble we do at the wedding, but you know, anything other than just landing right there. So the storytelling equivalent of a wobble would be not just holding that energy and staying with it when you finish. And you see it happen all of the time because it is a super powerful feeling to hold that energy for a group for a while. And then when you're finished, like that energy starts to drain out of your body and you see people get fumbly with it. They like start to want to give away that power all the time. And so that's when things start happening like, well, that's all my story. Or what does Forrest Gump say? That's all I got to say about that. You know?
What can I say?
Yeah. What else?
We have a neighbor who's 98 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And every single time he tells a story, he's like, well, what could I say?
Mm-hmm. So really, I just want to encourage you when you're telling a story to just like stick that landing. So if I gave you the challenge to tell a story, like you had to make a presentation just like I was about to do, what would be the first thing that you would go and do?
Make an outline.
Okay. Who else?
Okay, I'm here. Oh, but my camera's not on, but I think I would say, like, I would start with what do I want people to know at the end?
Very interesting approach. I love that. Okay, we have outline, we have like what's the final moment of the story.
For me, it's the subject. I mean, I want to think about what is it that, you know, what is it that I want to say, the subject itself.
What is this story about? Would anybody have the instinct to sit down and just start writing it out word for word?
I know some people on this call that would.
I've seen
Chris Campbell, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, Chris is nodding, yes. So that's what a lot of people's instinct is. They would write out the whole thing word for word. And this is one of the most interesting challenges that I have, especially because sometimes I work with writers to help them get ready, like after they've published a book, or they want to, start telling their stories on stage, but they're known for being writers. And this comes down to brain science. Joe Carson, who was Alternate Roots founder, did a lot of work around storytelling and brain science. And when I got started into storytelling more seriously about 10 years ago, I was constantly going and writing my stories down. And then I was telling her about this and how I get so nervous about, performing. And she was like, Turner, you got to decide, how are you going to give a story away? Are you going to give it away in writing, or are you going to give it away by telling it? And so she told me about this concept, which is that language actually lives in two different sides of our brain. Our written language lives on one side, and our oral, which connects to our lived experience, lives in the other side. So when you write your story down, it locks it into that other side of your brain, which means that you have to work twice as hard to then get it to come out your mouth. Mm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And the thing is, this really, to me, like, ties very seriously to what's kind of messed up about our education system. Because what happens is that folks, they get convinced that their written version of the story is the right version, that it's a script that they can get right or wrong. And they talk themselves out of their own power. But it's your story. It's the one thing that you can't get wrong. So a lot of the coaching that I do is about helping people take back their sense of empowerment around their stories, about knowing that, yes, you absolutely should have an outline. You should understand the shape of your story. You should, have that first and last line planned out. But a lot of what comes in between is flexible, and you own that stuff. It's like one of the most bold things that you can do. And we are taking this stuff back from the capitalist forces of Netflix and Disney Plus and all of those things that have stolen our stories away from us and sold them back to us piecemeal. Sorry, I had a little preacher moment there.
Yes, do it. We're listening.
So, one of the best reasons for us to get into this work is that stories have the power to transmit data more quickly than if you just listed a bunch of facts and statistics. So I could write an article about the power of, how you can just change your mind and get up and make a different choice. But what if telling the story about getting stuck the way that I did has a better capacity than that article? And that's what they're finding over and over again, that stories, especially our true lived experiences, and which you can and should pair with data when it comes to talking about who we are, the work that we're doing, it's going to get into people's brains and be much more understandable and relatable than if you list all those facts and figures. Does that make sense? Totally. Yeah. So we were going to do a deep listening exercise and talk about that, but we're going to, I think because of time, come back and do that next week. So I feel like we really are on this place of understanding personal storytelling is just like this active discernment. It helps us go deep, figure out who we are before we then endeavor to go out into the world and figure out, what it is, the other stories that we're going to tell. Now, here's something really interesting, and we're going to come back to this concept in the third workshop that we do, but it's really important for what we're doing today. So there's this great article that came out through the TED organization. And I don't know if you know this, but TED doesn't just do talks. They make like lots of great articles that you can read as well. And when you become a storyteller, everybody in your life will send you every single article that has the word storytelling in the title. And which is interesting because storytelling is kind of having a moment right now. People use it to mean all kinds of things. Storytelling can mean social media, it can mean writing, it can mean all this kind of business stuff. But this particular article was about how we have this tendency, there's like two kinds of people in this world, which I think is funny. There are two kinds of people in this world, people who think there's two kinds of people in this world and everybody else. But in this way, the people who tell themselves the story of their life is going from good to bad, and people who tell themselves their stories are going from bad to good. And when I read this article, it really helped me understand the work that I was doing. Because what it was saying was that when you tell the story of your life on one of these two trajectories, you make choices according to that story. And therefore, it starts to become sort of a manifesting story. So if you see your life as constantly going from bad to good, then you will keep making those choices. I also just want to take a moment to plug why storytelling, growing it in your organizational culture is really just so cool and so important. You know, as I mentioned, I was doing this for a long time in a lot of different ways before I was even ready to like claim it as my profession. In my 20s, I worked for the YMCA, and my job was to recruit, train, and supervise college students as they went out into the community and led their own volunteer programs. And I was constantly using storytelling in my curriculum with them around reflection and evaluation and community building. And then, so my last job before I went out on my own, I was the managing director of a dance company, and I would constantly use storytelling in my supervision of staff members. And I'll never forget, there was this one day where I was working with this woman who was having quite a bit of trouble in her job. And it was a strained relationship between her and another, it was actually the artistic director. And I was sort of like sandwiched between them. And every time we would get into these supervisory meetings, she would start to cry. And now I know that tears in the workplace can be problematic for some people, and especially white woman tears. But I often believe that when they're happening a lot, they can show that there's a power imbalance happening. And in this situation, it had become really hard to watch these two women grapple with each other. And so finally, I just closed my laptop one day and I said, I'm going to tell you a story. I remember when I was in the 6th grade and I would come home every day and I would have all of my paper folders with the brackets and the pockets on each side, one for each subject. I would always do my math homework first because I was a girl and I was getting those messages that I wasn't supposed to be good at math or like it or whatever. And so I would do my math homework quickly and I would get it out of the way, and I would spend the rest of the night on my English and social studies and the subjects that I thought I liked and was better at. And later on, when I was a high schooler and I took the SAT, I scored the exact same on math and verbal. And it never even occurred to me that I was doing my math homework quickly and getting it out of the way. And I never understood that that was a part of what was happening to me. I wonder what the lesson for you in that would be. And she immediately, like a transformation came over her body. And she said, I'm spending a lot of time on this one part of my job because I get to work with one other staff member and it's not lonely. I'm terrified of the other parts of my job because I don't know how to do it. And 4 months later, she quit. Now, I wish that I was telling you this story because I had somehow transformed this whole situation, turned it around, and like made her like a better worker. But I still think the value of this story is that by connecting with her through story, she figured out that it was an untenable situation and she was never going to get any, more comfortable with her working life. So that's just a little plug for why taking the time to connect and have authority of our stories in the workplace is really, really important. So with that, let's have some open discussion about the session, what you're feeling, what you're learning, what you struggle with the notion of storytelling, and why you're here.
Thank you. I think that kind of knowing more about story structure is really helpful for those of us that are not formal storytellers, although, we do it for a living. But the idea, I think that the brain science behind how you tell a story is really powerful and helpful. Because if you know that once you write it, it might be a challenge to talk about it, I find that I can talk about it much easier than I can write about it. So just knowing that the disconnect there is really helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, did you have something that you want to say?
I was just going to say thank you. I really appreciated the reminder about the need to be vulnerable. I think that's really important, a really good reminder. I think particularly in our own stories, but I am especially reminded about sharing on behalf of our organization that it is important for us to show vulnerability, that will help us, help us with our supporters, help them help us is what I mean to say. So thank you for that reminder today. I needed to hear that. And I need to leave. So thank you so much.
Okay, bye, Andrea.
Bye.
Chris Campbell had her hand up.
You can hear me?
Yes.
So my question is, if the story is going to be written, start with journaling?
Well, I'm not a writing coach. I would say there's lots of different ways in journaling. I don't think anybody will ever tell you not to journal. I think it's a great practice. A lot of people will use warning pages or other, things like that as an excavation tool. I think if you wanted to play with written or oral language as a way into your stories, you could turn on your recorder when you're in the car or, getting ready in the morning, taking a walk, and just try speaking and seeing what happens, and then go back and write them out afterward.
So when you have a story, do you have notes of your story?
It depends on the length. So there have been stories that I've told just completely off the cuff, because I'm pretty good at organizing them in my head and knowing the beats and, having that frame for the front and the back part of it. If it's a longer story, and especially something that I'm doing for formal performance, then I have this trick where I get Post-it notes or slips of paper, and I write out what would be like one bullet on, on an outline on a piece of paper, and that way I can move them around. Like I put them up on a window or a wall or a door or something, and that way if I want to like get more fluid with the structure, I can do that. The biggest shows that I've done, I have tended to get a little bit more scripty, just because I felt like I needed to, really lock that down. So that would be like a 30-minute story.
I think what I'm also hearing is having some sort of discernment between a story that you're telling verbally and a story that you're writing, and then how those might relate to each other. As those that have been through all of our meetings and Public Image Works, that I would recommend that you get some clarity about that. It doesn't have to take a long time, But for me, the way that I often get clarity is who am I? Who's my, like, who am I? What's the point? Not just what's the point of my story, but like, why would I tell this story? And then who's the audience on that? And not to get too far down like a whole audience mapping thing, but like, oh, this is a verbal story, and that gives me more fluid ability to be extemporaneous. And then I'm going to translate that into a written story. Or I'm writing something that's a written story first, and yeah, I need to have some structure around that. And I don't think there's just like one approach.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I loved what Joe Carson said about just figuring out how you're going to give a story away. And there are certainly stories that when I mentioned, like when I've done like a 30-minute story, because I had to do so much like crafting and curating of that, I actually went back and did like a very written version of that, and I got it published on the Bitter Southerner. So like, I just feel like because of the trajectory of what Joe was talking about in terms of like the written to the oral versus the oral to the written, it was super important for me to tell that before I wrote it. Lisa?
So it's been great seeing you first, and it's been great to sit in on this, because I've never considered myself a very good storyteller. I've found that my sitting down and writing, again, starting with my subject and what, and then start to write and draft and just dump on a page first, more so than to speak it out. And then I felt that that was my safe space, because again, finding that safe space to be vulnerable, that somehow the speaking it out, that kind of a thing. And so this is giving me a lot to think about, because eventually, as in scripting or doing theater, I was dumping onto the page, and then eventually wanted to be heard and to sound as if it's rather oral, natural kind of thing. And this is really helpful, because I've wanted to just incorporate more of that storytelling, the beginning, and let it just flow out. So I thank you, because it also has me thinking about whether or not I've actually landed, even in the pieces that I've written. Am I making that landing? Here, other
somebody that might need to meet. There you go. So thank you, Lisa. As a theater maker, I just want to call out to you that there is this interesting tension and opportunity between storytelling and theater, because I see people who are able to fluidly go back and forth, but there's this opportunity for discovery in the moment in storytelling, that whereas theater is scripted. However, when you tell a story over and over and over again, as the one that I told at the beginning I have, it starts to lose its emotional resonance, so it does become much more like a monologue and gets a little bit more locked in, like a monologue would be, so it is
like your uncle's story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it isn't, I have worked with theater makers who wanted to use personal storytelling as a way to create material for shows that they wanted to do, like the one that you did that was so beautiful.
Thank you. And just to kind of, that's actually the one I'm kind of thinking that's going to be online, not to just to plug it through Jumpstart anyway, that I'll remember for you, but I've had to narrow down, especially with this new virtual, format that we're using. So this is helpful. And I like the whole idea of even using a recorder first, to find and dump, as opposed to on a page to just record it, for myself.
Yeah.
So we need to wrap up, but I want to make sure to give Nancy an opportunity, because she had her hand up for a while.
Well, I put a comment in the chat And I'll just say thank you because I have been working on my memoir, I guess, and story, and just hearing that brain science part really amplifies for me that it feels I've been stuck with the memoir, and the story I think is much more suited for storytelling rather than the written, at least at this point in my development of it. So I want to thank you again.
I think that would be just still a way back to your writing. Like, where are you, Nancy?
Well, right now I'm at the Jersey Shore. I live out in Philadelphia.
So, oh my gosh, Philadelphia has so many amazing storytelling events and opportunities where you could go and show up and throw your name in the hat and like just start telling some of the stories that you think might be potentially material for your book, and then, you know, make sure that performance gets recorded and then go back and write from there. Or if you're feeling shy about being on stage, just, you know, take your phone with you on a walk and turn on that recorder and start talking to yourself, or bring somebody else with you, or, you know, call them on the phone and see if you can record your phone call. Like, there's lots of ways that you could use that oral place to get back into, you know, the writing. Before we go, I do want to do like another reminder about Life Maps. Next week is going to involve some supplies. So make sure that you show up with some paper and some, you know, big color markers, or, you know, crayons, color pencils. I'm a big fan of the big fat color markers because they make, you know, really bold lines. If you go on my website, I'll drop a link in here. You'll be able to see what Life Maps is all about and how I use it in my work to cultivate material. Because I've literally done it now with thousands of people. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun. So it's a little bit interesting now trying to pivot everything into what it's like to be in virtual space, but I'm really looking forward to doing that with you all. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Shannon. It's so great to have your expertise and so many great ideas in just the beginning. So this is definitely a wonderful addition to our weekly communication support meeting. So I hope I'll see you for the next 2 sessions. We are recording this, so you can tell people if they want to get in on the next couple sessions and they haven't been able to attend the first one. We will put this recording out so people can do that and get in on this. And we are passing a hat for this series because we want to make sure to compensate Shannon for this. So I'm going to put the PayPal link in the chat, and I thank you to the people that have already proactively thrown some money into that hat, as little or as much as you want, and there's no expectation that you will. We just want to make sure to keep the economy going in these times. So thanks, everybody. And tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock is our anti-racism in communication and action call at the same Zoom. So anybody who's new to this call and social impact is welcome to join and tell other folks too. All right. See you next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.